George has worked for the Archdiocese for 41 years in various capacities. Interesting, when my team in our office was reviewing the talking points today, Becca David said, "I didn't know that about George. I didn't know that about George." George has been around a long time and is kind of one of the great pillars of institutional knowledge of the Catholic Church in the Archdiocese. He graduated from Conception Seminary. He worked as a DRE, as a Director of Religious Education, as a classroom teacher, a principal. He's worked as a canon lawyer. He's been the Director of the Office of Family Life in the Archdiocese. He has a licentiate degree in canon law from St. Paul's University, in Ottawa, and he serves as a judge in our tribunal here in the Archdiocese. In his current role as archivist, he is responsible for organizing and preserving historical documents, photos, artifacts, by the way, some of which you're seeing on the screen behind me, that cover the 150-year history of the Catholic Church in Oklahoma. I invite you, if you're ever in the Pastoral Center, to look George up and ask him for a nickel tour of his workplace. It's a fascinating spot off the conference center. Of the collection of memorabilia is, and there's a story with every piece of it that George can tell you. It's amazing. He writes the From the Archives article in the Cedar Catholic, which are always entertaining and informative. George was the president of the Historical Commission for the Cause of Stanley Rother. He's going to show you a pretty cool show and tell item when he does his talk about that from that process. His job in the commission was to research the life of Father Rother through any writing from, about, or to him. He currently serves on the committee responsible for the creation of the museum that's currently under construction at the Blessed Stanley Rother Shrine site. George has a particular love of hockey, which I didn't know until recently. Did you all know that we had a hockey team in Oklahoma City? I didn't know that until George told me recently. But he's also a former baseball coach, so he knows what it means to pinch hit. So please welcome George Rigazzi.
Thanks for saying pinch hitter. If it was designated hitter, I'd be angry. I hate the badge. Absolutely despise it. It's just not baseball. I don't know what that's about. I had a brief little quote here from a great theologian philosopher by the name of Vin Scully, who just passed away a few days ago. If you don't know Vinny, he was the voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers, before that Brooklyn Dodgers, for 67 years. He had his last year of broadcasting, I got the baseball package so I could just listen to Vinny at night before I went to bed. He was that good. He told great stories, and he loved the faith. And he had a quote. He said, "Don't be too sad that it's over. Smile because it happened." And I've been trying to think of that all day and say, yeah, I should be doing that more often. All of us should. So I want to tell you a little bit. First of all, I can see looking out over your eager faces that you're all saying, "Where's Lipinski?" Sorry, as we say in Canada, where I went to school, this is what you got. So we're going to talk a little bit about something very near and dear to my heart. I really I knew of Father Stan when I was a seminarian for Tulsa many years ago, and Father Wolf and I were talking about that earlier, and I was living at Christ the King that summer. We had lunch with our friend, and I heard about him, and then it had happened, in the summer of '81, and it really struck me because even though I never met the man, I wish I had, I felt a kinship to what he was about. And so when I came to the Archdiocese, those many years ago, 1981, to teach at McGinnis High School, that was still fresh on everybody's mind. And there was still a lot of discussion about Father Stan and what he meant to the church in Oklahoma and what he meant to the church in the Americas. Now I know I talked to Sister Marita, who at one time was his sister, his biological sister, who was the associate superintendent of Catholic schools in Oklahoma for a while, Oklahoma City Archdiocese. And I asked her about that. I said, "Does this all feel very surreal to you?" And her response was, "Yeah, it's my brother, and that's how I know him." But she's absolutely thrilled from what she's told me about what's happening. It's always a pleasure when I get to speak with her. So how did all this happen? One of the things that I always thought was interesting is that the connection that former Archbishop Beltran had with Father Stan, because he was Bishop of Tulsa at the time. And when the mission was founded back in '64, it was the Diocese of Oklahoma City and Tulsa, right? So when the diocese split in '73, we still both funded and helped the mission. And so when things began to get very tense in Guatemala, and Archbishop Salaka said, "Come home," like now, and he finally came home in January of '81, Father Rother was absolutely miserable from what everybody told me about how he felt. He said, "I don't belong here, I belong there. Those are my people, I need to be where they are." If there's one word to me that describes Blessed Stanley Rother in spades, it's courage. Throughout his life. Because he had a very difficult time, as you know, in seminary, and actually had Latin killed him. And so I asked Sister Maria about that one time. I said, "No, wait a minute. He went to Guatemala, he learned Spanish and a complex Indian dialect. What is that about?" And she said, "Oh, he wanted to do that." And so, okay. All right, whatever works. But he got ordained in '63, and from your alma mater, I got to put that plug in. He's sitting right there. Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg. And so his entire life, when he worked at 4 different parishes in the dioceses, later dioceses, and finally went in '68, and he was kind of the perfect candidate for missionary work. He could do anything, build anything, fix anything. He was a farmer. His only big issue that didn't quite go well is we tried to bring Oklahoma bass and put it in Lake Atitlan. That didn't work too well. So it's a great idea. It didn't go well. The thing about Father Rother is his tenacity and that courage during the earthquake in 1976, when he would go into places to rescue people that no one else would go. And I think when I had some people that I interviewed when we were doing all this process, he said when he became pastor, it's almost like a light switch went on. Like those insecurities he had about flunking out of the seminary went by the wayside. And now you realize this is my mission, and this is what I'm going to do. And he did it with great verve. And it was a hard job. It was a very difficult job. As Bishop Taylor once described it, it's a meat grinder in a mission. It's not romantic at all. It's hard work. He got it. And I heard Father talking about the Rother side of the family. Those people are go. Because he's related, you know. And so that go was Father Rother. He was a person who worked very hard. So when all this came about, Archbishop Beltran in 2007 said, I really would like to see something happen with Father Rother before I retire in 2010, because by canon law, at age 75, you submit your resignation. That would be August of 2010. So in 2007, he said, I'm going to see if we can do what we need to do to start the cause. Now, there was a canonical issue they had to go through, and one of those things was in Guatemala in the 1990s, they had announced to Pope John Paul II, when he was there on a visit, we're going to have the Latin American martyrs, and we're going to work on their cause and have them canonized, and it's going to be great. Well, one of the things that I learned very quickly in working on the cause is, first of all, you have to have personnel, and secondly, you got to have money, neither of which Guatemala had. So Father Stan was number 78 on the list of 78. So it wasn't happening. So Archbishop Beltran got permission from Guatemala, and then he set up the tribunal. And all the people who worked on the cause initially. And some of those are now deceased, unfortunately, like one of my favorite people in the world, Father Charlie Shetler, who's on the Theological Commission. So we had a mass to start the cause officially. Deacon Norm Maestrick, who's here somewhere. Norm, I don't know where you are. There you are, Norm. Norm was going to be the coordinator for all this, and he actually kind of had to crack the whip on us near the end, and it was really brutal and ugly, but that's another story. But Norm worked so hard on this cause. He started July 4th, we're talking about it today, in 2007, and began getting it all together, and he wrote a biography that we had to send off and say, this is why we want to start this cause. So in October of 2007, we had the official opening at Okarchi, appropriately. And so I was assigned to the Historical Commission, and which consisted of actually four of us, Kara Koenig, Tish Eason, and eventually Maria Scaparlanda. Maria, unfortunately, was ill at the time and couldn't help as much as she wanted to. We wanted her to because of her researching skills. All she did was write a book. Come on, it's no big deal. So she is the expert, really, I think, on Father Rother, besides you and a few others that know him so well, and Bishop Taylor. So as we worked on this process, we were trying to gather whatever we could get. And all of us had full-time jobs. I was in the Office of Family Life. Kara was working at the Sooner Catholic. Tish was chancellor. And so we did what we could do when we could do it, which was a couple days a week. We managed to go through piles and piles of information, and there were piles and piles. So as we edited things out, our man in Rome, Dr. Ambrosi, said, we'd start out as, his life is going to be what we're going to focus on. And said, I don't know if we can do martyrdom, is what he told us. And so finally, about midway through, when we were focusing on the other, he said, no, we're going to do martyrdom. I said, okay, great. So we went through everything again, which wasn't a bad thing, read through it again, and got through all the information to find out what we could use and what was relevant. And you would be surprised how much we had. And we put out, feelers basically in the Sooner Catholic and other publications before social media went off the deep end. And so we were talking about, can you have anything that you can tell us about Stan Rother? We want to know whatever it is you've got. Give it to us. And all of a sudden, all this stuff came pouring in. Correspondence that people had kept. Photographs from like Joe and Mary Tinker, who spent so much time down there. All the Frankie Williams stuff, who was this wonderful lady who was a nurse from Wichita, good Methodist lady, never became a Catholic, but she loved the mission and she loved Father Stan. So we got all this information, and of course there was tons of things published after he was killed, and we used all that too. And so by the time we got all that together, there were 7,000 documents to send to Rome. Now, that also includes eyewitness testimony, which we had quite a bit of. And at that time, a lot of the people who were there and knew him were still alive. Not so much anymore. Many of them have since passed. And the people who did most of those interviews were Bishop Taylor, who was Father Taylor at the time, and then Monsignor Weisenberger, who became Bishop Weisenberger. And they did most of the interviewing, and we did the other stuff behind the scenes. So we tried to get a picture of who he was, and if this martyrdom was indeed martyrdom. I knew from the beginning it was, there's no doubt in my mind, but we had to find a way to prove that. So we spent hours and hours going through this material, and it was all fascinating and tragic and terribly sad, and we had tons of letters that he had written home, and but what's interesting is I still get stuff today, even after that, because Marty came in the other day, Tom's wife, his brother, Father Stan's brother, with 4 new boxes of stuff. And it was all from Gertrude, his mother. And it was like, I can't believe this. It's a treasure, because there were letters in there that he had written to them while he was a seminarian at Mount St. Mary's, near the end, before his ordination. Never seen them, didn't know they existed. And the family typewriter we now have. And we looked it up this morning, it's a 1925 typewriter. And it looks it. So I have some work to do on that thing. But the fact of the matter is, it gave us that sense then of this family connection, which was so strong. And I always asked her, I said, tell me how you didn't know he was going to the seminary, you're going to the convent. We didn't talk about it. So, well, okay. So they announced it at the same time. And both were shocked. But it's so much fun, too, to watch when you read the correspondence between the two of them, between Sister Marita and Father Stan. When they first started, it was very formal. Dear Father Stanley, and dear Sister Marita. Well, and by the end, it was Stan and Marita. And you could tell their relationship had really grown in that time. So we got insights into his humanity. And one that, besides courage, another word I think is very operative with him and is very important, is humility. And humility for Father Stan was not, as is sometimes seen in our culture today, as weakness. On the contrary, to strength. The only power we have is to serve others. And no one understood that quite as well as Stan Rother. So my privilege in being involved in all that culminated really with the day in July of 2010. Let me tell you a quick story on that. We were all doing our thing, and we'd gone through all this stuff, but we hadn't exactly organized it all yet. And Archbishop Beltran in April said, I want this done by July. As our jaws went down to here, really? Yeah, July. I have to submit my resignation in August, I want it by July. Okay, so we dropped everything else we were doing, and good, thanks be to God, I had a great staff, and they took care of things. But that's all we did. I mean, that's all we did. And so when it came down to the time that we were supposed to submit the Historical Commission's report, I wrote about almost half of it, and the other half was written by Bishop Taylor, his history of the mission, which is still the best as far as... if you know Father Taylor, Bishop Taylor, I always tell people we're working on a project together, and we weren't agreeing on something. Can you imagine? We weren't agreeing on something, and so I looked at my emails the next day. It was 2:00 in the morning. I said, would you go to bed? For God's sakes, man. He could do anything. Hardest working priest I've seen in years. And he spoke 6 languages too on top of that. So he didn't really argue too much with Father Taylor. But he always had a good idea of who Father Rother was and a very strong sense of how we should go about things. And oftentimes he was right. We got it all together. We had the closing ceremonies at the cathedral. I don't know if anybody got to go to that. Anybody get to go to that? Yeah, the priest, you were there. It was pretty exceptional, as to say the least. And it was, and somehow very medieval, because you had the wax seals that you sealed everything, and they had to be sealed when they got to Rome. And we sent them everything in triplicate. And we kept our copy, which I have in the archives. And we have the original copies, actually. So I got to know for the past 15 years, Blessed Stanley Rother. He has been a blessing to me in this life. And I know that I was talking to Peter. I said, I just want to tell him about how we did this so people will know, because most people don't. And I said, there's no reason for me to talk about his life again, because I think everybody in this room has heard about Stan Rother, unless you've been living under a rock. Because in Oklahoma, and if you're someplace else, obviously, you have not heard. But most of us here are very well aware of what he means to this diocese, the Tulsa diocese, the diocese of Guatemala, Solana. He is a beacon of hope to me. He was an ordinary guy who did extraordinary things, which I think is the definition of sanctity. He gives me hope, who's an extremely ordinary guy, that somehow I can live up to that same process that he brought to this world to show us how God loves us and grace continues. So I thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry I'm not the guy you wanted to hear. However, tough. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes.
Sorry? Yeah, we do. We have a couple minutes for questions.
Okay.
But I also want you to show them your show and tell.
Oh, I forgot, yes. All the stuff that we did, I told you about in the big boxes. Here it is. This is the positio. How the process worked, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I want to tell you just very briefly that how it goes. We sent it off to Congregation 2010. In 2011, we said, we think you may have a case here. Give us a positio. And so, if you're in the congregation of Cause of Saints and you see big boxes, no, give me one of these. Put it together so I can see how this is going to work. So what happened is Dr. Ambrosi and his assistants came up with the positio, and this has the documents that I was telling you about in here. And I threatened Peter, so I was going to read the section where my name's in it, but I'm not going to do that. This is the positio, and it's a very important document. And you'll see it at the new museum, which, by the way, let me tell you right now, people, it's going to be spectacular, because the people who are designing this are the same people who designed the memorial downtown. And Deacon Norm and I, with some other people in Leaf on the committee, have been working very hard for about 2.5 years, about that much, Norm? Yeah, of coming up with what we want. And it's going to be amazing, I promise. And you'll be very proud to be an Oklahoma Catholic when you see this museum. So, I'm sorry, now what was the question?
Just one question. What did you have to prove as the historical commission? What would distinguish Stanley Rother, the martyr, from Stanley Rother, the murder victim, or something like that?
Well, if it was,
Repeat the question.
yeah, the Archbishop was asking whether, well, why do we have, what do we have to prove, and what's the difference between somebody's being murdered and somebody being a martyr? It became extremely clear to us that the reason why he was killed is because he was living the faith as he was required to do by the Lord. And so he knew that it was dangerous for him to be there. He's very well aware of that. I had a couple of people who knew him well tell me that when he came up for your ordination and he said goodbye that time, there was a finality to that. And it wasn't quite that way when he went back in April of that same year, Holy Week. But he knew that he probably wouldn't be home again. And he knew, but he had to be there. He said that there's that great quote that my life is for my people, I'm not afraid. And he truly believed that, and he truly lived it. So he was, that's to me, that's the difference, because he knew he was going to have to give his life for the people he served in faith, because everything that animated him was the Lord. And that, to me, talk about you, that's you can get a better definition of martyrdom than that. I don't think so.
So George, I have a question.
Sure.
So you spent literally thousands of hours on this process, and researching every part of his life.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the next step. So he's now Blessed Stanley as of September of 2017. We're building a shrine. He's going to be ensconced in the altar of the chapel. How does he become Saint Stanley Rother?
Well, it's okay. The normal process is, it's not for a martyr, but for a person going through the whole process of canonization, there are 2 miracles required: for his intercession or her intercession, whatever it might be, and the fact that we can attribute that a miraculous occurrence because of that intercession. Because he was a martyr, the first miracle is waived. Okay, so now we're waiting on a miracle that, and Deacon Norm is in charge of that people who report possible miracles to the Archdiocese. Deacon Norm looks at them very carefully and decides whether or not the criteria is there, and whether or not they're indeed miraculous, because it's a very complex process, and you have to have the medical people saying, there's no other explanation for this. So, I don't know, people say, do you think it's going to happen anytime soon? And I have this weird feeling that it will. I don't know why. Maybe it's because when we finish the cause and sent it off, Monsignor Weisenberger, who was an old seminary friend of mine, said, George, we're going to be in wheelchairs when anything happens on this. 10 years, that's it. That's nothing in Roman time. So 10 years, and no one really thought that was going to happen, but it didn't hurt to have a pope who's interested in Latin American martyrs. But at the same time, I asked Dr. Ambrosi, and this is not, I'm not tooting my horn, it's everybody else's horn I'm tooting. He said, it's because it was so well presented. And it was prepared well, and we had tons of people working on that cause. Getting it together near the end was like watching a Laurel and Hardy movie. It was crazy. There are all kinds of things. I'm dating myself. I can see Joe saying, who? Forget it, Joe. So the thing is, what happened is they got everybody together, and we were notarizing pages right and left to try to get it done in time to get this off to Rome. And so, there was an extensive tribunal named as far as the initial one, the Historical Commission, the Theological Commission. Abbot Lawrence was on the Theological Commission, and of course, and Father Shetler, and some other people that I said are no longer with us now. And so we were just fortunate. We felt very privileged to have that information. So now we're hoping through your prayers to the Lord and the intercession of Blessed Stanley that he can be canonized soon. And that is my hope and prayer, because I want to go to Rome and you're going to pay for it. Thank you.